Monday morning this week, crude oil was surging toward multi-year highs. By Wednesday afternoon, it had come down another 12%. In between, we had a force majeure at one of the biggest polypropylene facilities in North America, an anti-dumping challenge in Brazil that could really change U.S. polyethylene exports here, and two nylon 6,6 production facilities announcing capacity reductions. If your procurement process depends on predicting that type of week, you're going to have a bad year, because that is, again, just 1 week. And that is par for the course these days. I am Michael Workman from Resinsmart. This is Resin Market Moves for the week of May 8th. And this week's theme is really the only thing we're talking about in a market like this. You cannot control the turbulence, but you can know that you can control your instruments. I had a couple flights last week, and on one of them, we did have some unexpected turbulence, and it's always a little bit of a heart palpitation deal when that happens. But the pilot usually comes on like he did on this one and reassured us that the controls were still under his control. And that's really the metaphor I want to hone in on this week. I was at FlexForum earlier in the week where I spent time with some flexible packaging converters, asking a question that I normally ask in every session. How many of you can tell me right now what you should be paying for your top resin product? Not what the supplier says, not what the index says, but what comparable buyers at your volume levels are actually transacting at. And, again, not a lot of responses to that are, positive that that's the way these folks are doing it today. There were just very few positive answers. The gap is the business problem. Everything else, crude oil swings, force majeure events, the geopolitical macro level situation, it's just the weather. The benchmark that you have is your altimeter. Polyethylene, let's scratch that part. Now let's get into the market. Polyethylene, again, we're seeing continued margin expansion activities here. Proposed May increases up to 20 cents a pound. Ethylene, if we looked at what that did last week, it did drop 3 cents. It's flat year to date. Again, these nominations are not cost recovery. The important part is to take the right posture and ask your supplier for cost support. And if they can't produce one, then you have your answer. Polypropylene, it's important to pay attention to the force majeure situation with Total at La Porte. PGP feedstock is flat. If your supplier is citing the situation with Total to justify some additional increase, we should really be asking which grades are affected and what duration looks like. Force majeure affects availability for the impacted grades at the plant. It doesn't just go retroactively and can be applied portfolio wide. Nylon 6,6 is the story of the week for the engineered materials. Celanese is closing a very large 55,000 ton plant in Singapore that produces nylon 6,6, and that's going to happen in July of this year. They're also reducing rates in plants that they have in North America. We did see Lone Star Funds consolidating Radici and Domo, two of the other large nylon 6,6 producers. When supply concentration increases and capacity comes out of the market, the floor does move up, and that can be, systemic. And the time to qualify alternatives in that market has been yesterday, but is certainly now. While there's still competitive pressure here, not after the consolidation. In PET, we've got multiple things working against you right now. Paraxylene contracts are expected up another 4 cents to 78 cents a pound in May. We are entering bottle season. We do have the World Cup here again, and that's going to drive additional demand. North America, hurricane season starts in June. For PET buyers, it's the cost side and the demand side that are pointing in the same direction right now. If you have open quarter two positions, it's really important that you are covering them if you haven't already. So I keep coming back to this idea of instruments because I think it's the right mental mindset for this type of market. A pilot doesn't try to predict turbulence. They focus on the things they can measure: airspeed, altitude, heading. The market is what gives them the weather. Their job is to know where they are relative to where they should be. And in procurement, your instruments are your benchmarks, what you're paying relative to comparable buyers, your leverage map, where do you have qualified alternatives, and where are you stuck? your cost model. When a supplier sends an increase, can you separate what's cost and what's margin? If you have those things, a week like this one is something you can navigate. You know which increase letters to push back on and which ones are real. And you know which capacity announcements are affecting your grades. You know where your exposure sits. Before this type of force majeure event forces the conversation because you've got that mapped out. If you don't have those things, if your procurement process is reactive, if it's dependent on the index, if it's relationship managed, then every week like this will cost you money in a way that you didn't know that you were spending. If you're a plastics converter and you really want to know where you sit, what you're paying versus market transactions, that's what we do. The assessment is free for our partner networks to start. We'll show you the gap or we'll confirm you don't have one. Either answer has some value to your organization. Again, I'm Michael Workman. This has been Resin Market Moves. See you next week.